Welcome to lesson 1-7, intervals of positive and negative, and this is video 1. So for this topic here, for positive and negative parts of a function, I really like to look at this visual right here before you even actually fill in your notes. So look at what's going on. So up here, pretty intuitive, above the x-axis, we're going to call it positive. Below the x-axis, we're going to call it negative. And then if your output is on the x-axis, if your graph is on the x-axis, then we are going to call it neither. So there's three things that can happen. It's either positive, it's either negative, or it's neither. Alright, so let's fill this in real quick. So the positive regions of a function are those intervals where the function is above the x-axis. That's exactly what we just said, and what this shows right here. It is where the y values are positive, not 0. Okay, so think, what are the y values doing? Or what are the y values? Are the y values positive, or are the y values negative? The negative regions of a function are those intervals where the function is below the x-axis. It is where the values are negative, not 0. And then lastly, the y values are on the x-axis. Are neither positive nor negative. The x-axis is where y is equal to 0. So you can fill those in your notes. Now here, one thing you need to remember is that you're always going to give your answer as a set of x values in either interval or set notation, and you'll see what I mean here on the next screen here. Okay, so example 1, it says some functions are positive over their entire domain. So for example, this one right here, this is an exponential function, right? We know it's exponential because there's an x in the exponent here. So this 2 is being raised to the x. And this is what the graph looks like. So if I am reading this from left to right, so as I scan this graph from left to right, meaning start your scan where x is negative infinity. Hold on just a second. Let me change this to a thickness that makes sense. Okay. Okay. So this is negative infinity. This is positive infinity if you were to keep going. And if I were to go from left to right, this graph is always above the x-axis. Okay, so we're going to say that this is positive along this interval of negative infinity to positive infinity. So notice x is between here. It's very important that you understand that we are going to be using just less than symbols. That is because on this interval, if it's ever on the x-axis, it's never going to be positive, it's never going to be negative, it's neither. Okay, you could also call that all reals, or by using this interval right here from negative infinity to positive infinity. Alright, so some functions are negative over their entire domain. All values, in this case, any y values below the x-axis. So this is a quadratic function, and it is facing down like this. Okay, and as you move from left to right, so from negative infinity to positive infinity, what's happening here? Well, as you move from left to right, all of the values of y, so like look at this graph right here. This value of y is negative 2. So when x is 1, this value is negative 2. When x is 2, this value is negative 1. When x is 3, this value is negative 2. All of my values are negative. So we call this function negative on this domain right here of negative infinity to positive infinity. You could also say and call it all reals, or you could write it like this right here. And then lastly, we've got two things going on here. We have our graph is negative from negative infinity until we get to this point 0. Okay, so where x is equal to 0. So when x is 0, and then it becomes positive. So we're negative. See, look, if I go to negative 5, my output is negative 5 here. So all of these values right here, this whole line, is under the x-axis, so all of these values are negative. So this function is negative on this interval from negative infinity until you get to 0. And then it becomes, so I'm going to say that this is negative here. And I'm going to write it like this, negative infinity to 0. and I'll put parentheses, because we do not include this point 0, because think about what the y output is for whenever x is 0. The y output is 0, because it's right here on the x-axis. So because of that, we do not include this point of 0, because it's neither positive or negative. 0 is neither positive or negative. And then same thing for above here. We know that it is positive from 0 to infinity. Okay, so the secret to finding the intervals. So the secret to correctly stating the intervals where a function is positive or negative is to remember the intervals always pertain to the locations of the x values. Think of reading the graph from left to right along the x-axis. Do not read the numbers off the y-axis for the intervals. Stay on the x-axis. And so I like to kind of go a little bit further than that. So what the y is doing is what is going to tell you whether or not it's positive or negative. So like on this last example, what is the y doing? So what is the y doing over here? Well, the y is negative. Okay. Now we give our answer in terms of like a domain, if you will, as to what the x input and output, or the x input would be. Okay. So just be aware that you're looking at the y to see what it's doing, but you're giving your answer as a form of an interval of x's. All right, so here are the U-tries. You can go through that, and I will see you in the next video.